Good morning. We are now 4 weeks into the coronavirus pandemic here in the United States, and the question arises, what is the role of the church during these times? Thousands of churches have moved online due to social distancing guidelines. They are trying to keep a sense of normalcy in the midst of the most abnormal society most of us have ever known. Pastors are either pre-recording or live streaming, doing what they normally do, which is preach. Worship teams are reduced to shells of themselves. Normally where there might be 10 people, there's now 2 doing a shortened worship set in some cases. We at least feel we should be providing content for our church bodies. We can't meet, and even families are supposed to stay home and be with each other. While doing church looks completely different, the idea of being the church is being greatly tested. When we look at the church in Scripture, we see a true community of believers. In the book of Acts, we see a pooling of resources, a sharing of everything. In fact, between the end of Acts 2 and the middle of Acts 6, we see that they were all together and had everything in common. They sold their possessions and shared with anyone who had need. This wasn't mandated. Not one time did anybody tell them that they had to do it. They just saw needs and they met them. So the question arises, what should the church be doing right now? People have real needs. And while we aren't likely to join together and pool everything together, isn't that what offerings are for? A way to collect for the needs of the church? Well, that depends on how we define church. If we believe church is a place that we go and an organization that provides programs, our collections will go towards that idea of the church. In Scripture, we see exactly 2 examples of a model for collections in the church. The first is in 1 Corinthians 16, and the second is in 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9. Both of those collections are taken up weekly, exactly like every church in America does. When we start looking at exactly what those collections were used for, that's when things start to quickly diverge. Let's read 1 Corinthians 16, verses 1 through 4. It reads, "Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given orders to the churches of Galatia, so you must do also. On the first day of the week, let each one of you lay something aside, storing up as he may prosper, that there be no collections when I come. And when I come, whomever you approve by your letters, I will send to bear your gift to Jerusalem. But if it is fitting that I go also, they will go with me." Now let's look at 2 Corinthians 8, verses 1 through 4. It reads, "Moreover, brethren, we make known to you the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, that in a great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded in the riches of their liberality. For I bear witness that according to their ability, yes, and beyond their ability, they were freely willing, imploring us with much urgency that we would receive the gift and the fellowship of the ministering to the saints." In 1 Corinthians 16, he is telling the church at Corinth how to collect money for the needy believers in the church in Jerusalem. In 2 Corinthians 8, he is holding up the church at Macedonia as an example. They gave to the church at Jerusalem freely, even in the midst of persecution and in the midst of their own poverty. The weekly collections in Scripture are stored so that Paul can take them to the needy believers in other churches, specifically in the church at Jerusalem. There were a lot of people in poverty that were needy in this other church. Not a dime is used for overhead, for salaries, for programs. Every dime collected went to meet the needs of believers in other churches. How many churches today, in the middle of this pandemic, are looking at a drop in giving and wondering how long they can keep going? How long can they keep paying their staff and their overhead? I truly believe God is testing the church right now. How many of them are trying to find and generously meet needs at this time, just like we see in Scripture? Every week, we hear that our giving is an act of worship, and it truly is. Whether we give to a local church, another ministry, or an individual, we are giving as an act of thankfulness for all that God has given to us. Now is the time for local churches to put their money where their mouths have always been. Will we choose to give back to those in our congregation in great need as an act of worship? Or is that just something that we say to get people to give to us? Are we going to find a way to pour back into our congregations? Congregations who have so generously poured into local churches. Are we going to now use this time to find needs and meet them? I truly believe these churches that pass this type of test are going to be greatly blessed by God. And I don't mean financial blessings, though God does often seem to reward our giving, especially generously to other people, by continuing to pour resources into us to help us continue to meet those needs. Maybe the blessings won't be material or even received in this life. That's up to Him. But I do believe that churches who truly find a way to meet needs during this time will be judged according to Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46. If we care for those in need, for the unfortunate among us, Jesus calls us righteous, because inasmuch as we've done to the least of us and to those people, we've done to Him, He says. Our family has been paired with 2 other families in our church that have basic needs at this time, and fortunately, we've been able to meet those needs. As this pandemic goes on, the needs will become greater, and churches who have for so long used offerings for things like salaries and overhead, building expenses, now unable to take up weekly collections, are going to be under extreme pressure. Most churches will simply ask people to give more so that they don't have to skip a mortgage payment or lay off some staff. The select few who are primarily outward focused already probably are already set up with a network connecting people with needs to those who can meet those needs. And these churches are likely subsidizing some of the financial needs themselves because that's just their philosophy on the church. In this time when the church is being tested, we can look inward at our own needs as local churches, or we can reach out. I want to encourage us to pass that test so someday we can stand before Jesus and hear, "Well done."